Crop Grower magazine, we've written a lot about the farm labor issue and the H-2A program. And recently, we've been seeing the adverse effect wage rate increasing significantly for states like Florida and in the Southeast. So we thought it'd be helpful to have an expert come join us and talk a little bit about the program. Jamie Fussell is the Director of Labor Relations with the Florida Fruit and Vegetable Association, and he joins us today. Jamie, welcome.
Thank you, Frank. Glad to be here. Expert is scary words when it comes to this, but I hope I can offer something helpful.
Well, we appreciate you joining us, and we write a lot about this, and we mentioned this adverse effect wage rate, and I think you call it ERA. ERA, is that
A word.
A word, the acronym?
Mhm.
So we throw these terms around a lot, but we thought it'd be helpful to get really a very basic explanation of what that is and how that's calculated. And I know that's generated some of the problems where it's problematic. So we thought we'd turn that over to you to give us sort of a elementary explanation of that and give us some background.
Absolutely. So the adverse effect wage rate, or the AWR, is the minimum wage that's guaranteed and must be paid to H-2A workers and to U.S. workers in corresponding employment. And it covers most H-2A jobs like harvesting or operating farm equipment. It's defined and set by U.S. Department of Labor regulation. And the Labor Department's intent in using this A word is to ensure that the employment of H-2A workers does not adversely affect or impact the wages of U.S. workers who are working in similar jobs. The DOL uses data from USDA's Farm Labor Survey, so a different agency's survey, that survey is often referred to as the FLS, to set most H-2A wage rates. USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service, or NASS, surveys about 18,000 farm employers and asks what they paid in gross wages over four different reference weeks throughout the year. The USDA then publishes those results twice a year, and the Labor Department will typically use the November report to determine next year's AWAR.
Okay, great. And that is part of some of the problems that have created some of these wage increases. Just talk a little bit about how that has resulted in some of these significant wage increases.
Yeah, so when we're getting to the increases we've seen in the AWAR, just for example, Florida saw a nearly 10% increase this year, I think about 3% last year, and then 15% the year before. So you just see this volatility based on the Labor Department's methodology. There's a lot of things that could come into play from this, including increases to Florida's own state minimum wage, and also just the domestic labor shortage that we're seeing driving up the demand for workers. But I think what we're concerned with when it gets to DOL's methodology is their use of the Farm Labor Survey, which reports a gross wage, an average wage that's then used to be a minimum wage. Um, for a little bit of background, I'll mention that USDA has conducted the Farm Labor Survey for decades to monitor and track farm employment data. It existed well before the H-2A program and was not created with the intention to establish an H-2A minimum wage. The wage data that's collected by the FLS, it includes bonuses and overtime and incentive pay like piece rates, and it does not exclude H-2A workers. So it produces this gross average wage that we suspect has been artificially inflated by the prior year's AWAR.
Gotcha. And I understand there's some litigation across the country related to this. Just give us a little brief background of some of those cases and what we're looking at there.
Yeah, there's uh, the last administration and the Labor Department there was very active in rulemaking. And so the litigation across the country has also been very active when it comes to H-2A regulations. FFVA, we're currently part of two different lawsuits challenging recent DOL regulations, including one that challenges DOL's 2023 AWAR methodology rule. So for background, that rule made it to did what we recall disaggregated wages. So wages are no longer just based on the Farm Labor Survey, but are also based on the OEWS, the Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics Survey. So if you have certain jobs like farm mechanics or shuttle drivers or supervisors, those jobs may be determined by the OEWS wage instead of the FLS wage. Um, but back to the litigation on that, we're challenging that rule in the federal district court for the Middle District of Florida in Tampa. And we're challenging both the 2023 rule, but also the underlying notion that DOL has of implementing an adverse effect wage rate. Um, right now, that rule or that challenge is still pending. I think we're at summary judgment proceedings at this point, as of this date. There's some other lawsuits, similar lawsuits around the country. One in Louisiana has been granted some temporary relief. It's that relief was very limited to just the few parties that were a part of it, but it did provide some great momentum for litigation elsewhere in the country.
And for organizations like FFEA and other ag groups, I mean, you're kind of touching on it a little bit with the litigation there, but do you have any asks or suggestions of things that you think would make the program better and more user friendly for farmers?
Absolutely. There's a long laundry list of ways to improve the H-2A program. If we're just talking about improvements to how the wages are determined, at the end of the day, we're looking for a wage that is stable for employers and fair for workers. I think most would prefer a wage that is not artificially set by an agency, but a wage that looks more like either a state minimum wage or something based on the market. But because this is an urgent issue, we're working to achieve really any relief at any level. So we're working with USDA to improve the Farm Labor Survey so that we can get away from this gross average to something that looks more like a minimum. But also working with the congressional delegation for both short-term and permanent solutions.
Right. And we always, preach to the choir, they say a little bit about issues like this and encourage growers to make their voice heard and speak out on these issues and tell their stories. For a grower that's never done that before, just give us a few tips on how to do it, how to reach out and make your voice heard.
Absolutely. First of all, just be engaged and in association with other growers. If you're not already a member, we'd love for you to consider joining FFEA and the work that we're doing here. I think one of our strengths is that I mean, we're in frequent daily contact with our members. And so the messages we're carrying are the messages of growers, and growers just give us a different perspective that is often missed in Tallahassee or in DC, just for the actual on-farm impacts, and since the perspectives are not always what you would expect. Second of all, just look for any opportunity to give your perspective. Like I mentioned, growers have a lot of positive takes on the challenges we're facing, and uh, lawmakers, rule makers, legislators at all levels of government need to hear it. And that positive and active engagement will always be the most effective approach.
Excellent. Well, with that, Jamie, we'll wrap it up. We appreciate you joining us today. Unless you have anything else to add.
I do not, but thank you, Frank, for having me. It's great to see you again.